Like the times P.
How much wealth would be produced in Australia if everybody who depended for making their living on wages stopped going to work for the months of April and May? How much wealth would be produced during those months? That's right, zero. Zero wealth would be produced in that month. That's something you want to establish in your mind when you start talking about taxes, because it's the fact of life is that if the 90% of us who work for wages don't go to work, then there's no wealth being produced at all. And wealth is what is used to fund the government via taxes. Now, what's happened over the years is the amount of wealth that we're producing, um, the bottom 90% is growing. It's growing. It's growing a lot. It's growing by 2 to 3% in real terms if you measure the GDP. Uh, the GDP is the gross domestic product, which is the amount of sales of all the goods and services in Australia, and the GDP is how most of the official people measure the wealth that's being produced. So the real GDP goes up by 2 to 3% a year. That means we're producing more wealth every year. Stick a pin there. Okay? Remember that. We're producing more wealth, yet we're at this demonstration because the government is planning to cut various and sundry things that we get through the government, saying that the government can no longer afford it. They don't have the revenue. They don't have the money to fund public health, education, and welfare as they did before when we were producing less wealth. Now just look at the big picture of how wealth has grown in Australia, 2 to 3% in real terms, measured by the GDP, and what percentage of it that the people who are producing it, the bottom 90%, have been getting. Well, according to an ACTU study, the amount of wealth that was going back to the working class in the mid 70s was around 75% of the GDP. Now, today, it's only 60% of the GDP. Now, why is that? Why is it? We're producing more wealth, we're getting less of a percentage of it back, and they're telling us that we're poor, that the government's too poor to fund adequate public health, education, and welfare. Now, why is that? It's because there's a revenue problem. And the revenue is essentially a tax problem. And what's happened since the days of Gough Whitlam is that the company tax has been cut. That's one thing that's happened. The company tax in 1986 was 49%. And then in 1988, Hawke, who fell for the trickle-down theory of economics, which essentially states you got to tax the big end of town less, cut it to 39%. And then Howard, who is a devotee of the big end of town in the LNP, he cut it to 30%. And now this year, the LNP government wants to cut it to 28.5%. Now that's just one of the reasons why the government keeps saying that they don't have enough money to pay for health, education, and welfare. That's just one of the holes. Another hole is the fact that more and more companies are not paying any tax at all. What they do is profit shift. And profit shifting is where they get their profits, but then they shift them to offshore accounts in Singapore and Switzerland and places where they can hide the amount of tax and they do it all legally, and so they don't pay any tax. So like over 25% of the top 100 corporations in Australia don't pay any tax. Okay, and the multinationals is even worse. About 34% of them pay zero tax in Australia. So we're producing more wealth all the time, and yet the government's getting less money back in taxes from the big end of town because the company tax is being cut or has been cut, and it's all because all this ideology that they believe that if you cut the big end of town's taxes, that they'll create jobs and we'll all be better off. All boats will rise at the same time. Now, what conservatives hate about the tax system is that it taxes the upper 10% at all. And the biggest tax that taxes the upper 10% is the income tax. That's a progressive tax. A progressive tax is the tax that taxes you more the more wealth you have in your possession. And in the case of the income tax, the more income you're getting in. So that, for instance, the first $18,200 that you get in isn't subject to any tax. So people who make less than $18,000 don't pay any tax. But the people who, but the tax system, but the progressivity of the tax goes up as the amount of income that you have increases up to the point up to $180,000, where it sits at 45%. So any money that you make over $180,000 a year is taxed at 45%. Now, the conservatives don't like this, and so what they want to do is replace the income that they're getting, the government income that they're getting from progressive income taxes, with regressive taxes, and they've been doing this over the years, and by taxing you at the Bowser, for instance. The fuel excise tax is a regressive tax. All sales taxes are regressive taxes, including the sin taxes, the ones that you're taxed for beer and cigarettes. Now, regressive taxes work like this: everybody pays the same. Everybody pays the same percentage. It doesn't matter how much income or wealth you have. You pay the same as everybody else. Like Twiggy Forrest, who makes $50 million a day, and that's a fact. He pays the same when he goes to fill up his car as Joe Blow, who drives the garbage truck for $70,000 a year. So that's the kind of taxes. Now, if they're going to have taxes, they know that because they got to have a government. But what they want to do is increasingly to cut the big end of town's taxes and to shift it so that everybody pays the same tax, instead of like this fairyland of conservatism where they say, well, we live in we could live in a society of equality of classes. But the fact is that we don't. There is no equality between the classes, and that the proportion of wealth that comes out of an average worker's pay packet, when everybody's paying 10%, or as they're proposing to raise it to 12.5% or even 15%, that proportion is greater for people who have less wealth at their command. Okay, but that's what they want to do, and that's why we need to kick the LNP out, because they are basically saying that the government doesn't have enough money to pay for public health, education, and welfare, and they need to be cut, and they're just ignoring the elephant in the room, which is the fact that we're producing ever more amounts of wealth, and that wealth is not being tapped into to pay for our social wage, the public health, education, and welfare. And so what we need to do is tell the LNP that we're going to send them a price signal, and that price signal is you're going to lose office. And we're going to have to tell the Labour Party that what they need to do is propose to raise the taxes of the big end of town. I mean, there's no reason why 34% of the multinationals should be paying no tax. There's no reason why companies should be paying no tax. There is no reason why the government has to give $4.5 billion in tax concessions to the mining capitalists every year. There is no reason why we need to raise the GST to put it on fresh food. Which will essentially raise $6 billion in revenue for the government, but it will also put you out $5,500 a year. We need to send the message, and we need to send it now, and that's what we're doing. And I urge you all to keep doing it and to make sure that we change this government.